Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a very few seconds as people file in. Thank you for waiting in the waiting room, those of you who are there. This is Partners for Progressive Israel's latest webinar, Mass Destruction in the Name of Security, Israel's Buffer Zone in Gaza. So let me say hi to everyone in the United States, in Israel, in Palestine, and in other places in the world. As I said, this is our latest webinar in our series Conversations with Israel and Palestine. This webinar is being co-sponsored by the Israeli NGO and anti-occupation IDF veterans group Breaking the Silence, Shovrim Shtika. My name is Ron Smolnik. I organize these webinars on behalf of Partners for Progressive Israel. In just a moment, I'm going to pass the baton to Rabbi Margot Hughes-Robinson, Partners Executive Director. I'll first note that Partners for Progressive Israel, for those of you not familiar, is an American not-for-profit that is dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors that includes an end to Israel's occupation that is based on a two-state solution and self-determination for all. Partners supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, civil rights, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equality for all of Israel's inhabitants. The organization seeks to deepen Americans' understanding of the complexities of Israel and Palestine so that they can better advocate for a progressive future for all the inhabitants of the region. Partners is glad to be bringing this webinar to all of you for free. If you appreciate it and you'd like more programming like it, we urge you, if you can, to visit progressiveisrael.org and make a contribution to the best of your ability. Before we get going to upcoming program notes, one, tomorrow and on Friday in Jerusalem, there is an event called the People's Peace Summit, or It's Time, and it's being sponsored by the Peace Coalition, a coalition of a large number of peace-oriented and human rights-oriented groups in Israel and in Palestine. And Partners will be sending out an email later with links to link to a live stream. So if you can join that, we encourage you. And also next week, next Wednesday on May 14th, we'll be hosting for our next webinar, Yaela Ra'anana and Lubna El-Sana of the Regional Council for Unrecognized Villages of the Negev. So link for that will be going out later this week. Quick note about the chat before I introduce today's panelists. The chat is open. If you want to ask a question, though, click on Q&A. The chat will be for people who want to talk amongst themselves. We're not going to be looking into the chat to see if there are questions there. We will be looking at the Q&A. So I hope that distinction is clear. Now, let me introduce our panel today, and I'll hand things over. Luiz Averbuch was born in Brazil, where he grew up in the heart of the Jewish community and was a member and graduate of Habonim Dror, the Zionist Socialist Youth Movement. In 2011, he took part in a gap year leadership program in Israel called Shnat Hachshara L'Madrichei Chul. He later immigrated to Israel in 2014 and enlisted in the Nachshon Regiment of the Kfir Brigade. He served in the IDF from 2014 to 2016, primarily in the West Bank, but also with deployments along the Gaza and Lebanon borders. Following his military service, Luiz gave testimony to Breaking the Silence and later joined the organization's education team as the Jewish Diaspora Educational Coordinator. Guy Ben Yehuda Berlfein was born in Jerusalem. He served as a foot soldier in the 50th Battalion of the Nachal Brigade from 2017 to 2020. Following his release from the military, he worked in building construction, and he currently works as an interviewer in the Testimony Collection and Research Department of Breaking the Silence, Shovrim Shtika. Rabbi Margot Hughes-Robinson will be moderating today as the Executive Director at Partners for Progressive Israel. Ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2021, Rabbi Hughes-Robinson also holds an MA in Midrash, as well as an advanced certificate in interreligious studies from the Ecumenical Institute at Bossy and the University of Geneva. Let me hand things over now to Rabbi Margot Hughes-Robinson. I'll be back at the end to wrap up proceedings. I hope you find the webinar enriching, informative, I won't say enjoyable, but enriching and informative, and I'll see you all later.
Thanks so much, Ron. Appreciated. And thank you all for joining us. Guy, Louise, as we get started with this new publication, originally we planned this webinar to discuss the perimeter, breaking the silence, new publication. I imagine we'll still talk about the publication in depth, but also we've all sort of been hit with very intense news coming out of Israel's Security Cabinet about increased military involvement and occupation in the Gaza Strip. And I imagine that will motivate a lot of the questions and the context in which we're having this conversation today. Thank you again both for being here and for all our attendees for joining us. But let's start with the publication itself. Can you just both give us some background context for this new report from Breaking the Silence? What is the perimeter and how did it motivate the creation of this new report and testimony collection project?
So, hello everyone, I'll take that one. Thank you all for coming. Means a lot to us that you're willing to ask the hard questions and listening our perspective and the voices of the soldiers talking about this new reality that will definitely define the close future and a distant future too in our relationship between Israel and the Gaza Strip. So to understand what is the perimeter, we need to go back to 2005 and go back to the disengagement plan from the Gaza Strip when the state of Israel decides to remove all its military bases and settlements from the Gaza Strip. That doesn't mean, and it's very important to stress that out, that doesn't mean we ended the military occupation of the Gaza Strip, but we changed the way we control it. And then with that, the idea of establishing this sterile zone between the border of the Gaza Strip and in Israel appears in a more defined way. Even though we know that even from before the disengagement, we had some kind of sterile area, sterile zone that, according to testimonies, we see that it really changed depending of the unit, of the area, and of the period that we are talking about. And after the taking of the power from in the Gaza Strip from Hamas in 2007, then the Gaza Strip was defined as a hostile entity by the state of Israel, and therefore we define a bigger, a broader sterile zone of 300 meters in all the length of the Gaza Strip border. And this idea was kept during the years, even though we had more than 20 military operations in the Gaza Strip. Some of them very small, some of them were really big ones, and a lot of them we didn't even heard about in the media, or because they were smaller operations. But the idea that we control Gaza Strip from with violence was always there. And keeping this perimeter of 300 meters, that means that we have 5% of the territory of Gaza that it's absolutely closed. And at the time, until from 210 to 223, only farmers got permits to reach some of these areas, meaning that 5% of the Gaza Strip was close to known farmers. And after October 7, since the beginning of the war, we saw a lot of things from politicians and leadership, from settler movements celebrating it and really building expectations to go back to the Gaza Strip and getting really organized, and also establishment politicians and leaders talking about this idea of reduction of Palestinian territory in the Gaza Strip, which I remember in the last webinar we did, we also talked about this policy of revenge against the Gaza Strip and the Gaza population, So now we're seeing how this idea is still guiding the military activity. And with the time, we saw that the military and the politicians talked a lot about this idea of making this area bigger, about something around 1 kilometer or 3 kilometers from the border. And that means that would include 60% of the territory of Gaza Strip, but also inside of the 60%, 35% of the agricultural land of the Gaza Strip, meaning that would be a huge damage, which for now, for the present situation of this already an humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, but also damaging any potential to recover from that economically and socially, and also losing the land. The implementation of this perimeter during this war, a justification for that was this idea of bringing this buffer zone, which is an old philosophy of the IDF in the war. So is a retake of the buffer zone in Lebanon, or in buffer zones in the West Bank, but this time in its Gaza version, right? In this justification, it's always security. But in other hand, when we saw the main objectives of the war that were declared in the beginning, bringing the hostages back and ending Hamas, we didn't finish it. That this idea of bringing the hostages back, we still have hostages that have been absolutely denied help and support from the government now openly. They absolutely lost the shame to talk about that, and also Hamas it's not even close to not exist anymore, to not be a threat. So one may ask himself why is this policy, why we're doing that. But going back to how it was implemented, the idea of dividing this area in polygons and dividing it by units of the army, and according to the testimonies that I know Guy will be happy to also talk about the process of collecting in them, they talk about creating a scenario of 100% of destruction of all structures and civilian structures in these areas. As according to some testifiers said, making all the area absolutely flat, right? And with that, to keep this the same concept that we already saw in other or in another wars of destroying this buffer zone, the perimeter, and making it absolutely flat. So we have absolutely visual control of the area, right? So we keep the same philosophy of before. We make it harsher. We put it on steroids. We make this huge damage on the Gaza population, on the potential for them to recover from that, and we keep that through very open and a free policy of rules of engagement that maybe could helps to explain the huge number of victims, civilian victims, the casualties that we had during this war, which is a scenario absolutely insane and painful.
Thanks so much.
So this, that said, I'd like to, this is the basic context and background that we saw during this year and a half, and yeah, that's what I would like to add.
Guy, you're gonna have to unmute so we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Luis, for the setup. Hello everybody. My name is Guy, and I'm very glad that everybody joined today. I wanted to give a few more words of context about generally the way that the war is conducted, and then I will expand on the buffer zone myself, on the perimeter. When we come to engage the perimeter and to understand it, we need to think about the role of destruction, strategic destruction, in how the IDF conduct itself in previous wars. In Breaking the Silence, after I don't know for how many years we even talk about this kind of stuff, but from our testimonies about Operation Cast Lead and the Protective Edge in 2008 and 2013, and through the public announcement of some Israeli generals, we understood two ways that Israel conduct its wars against what we call, I don't know, like a counter-insurgency campaign, or like an asymmetrical war. And the first one, so the problem with an asymmetrical war, when you don't have a conventional enemy, is that sometimes it's very, very hard to define a victory in a war with an organization like Hamas, or specifically in 2006 with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what the IDF has conducted during the 2006 Lebanon war to achieve some kind of, how would you say that, not a victory, but an exclamation point to put in the end of the war, was the Dahya Doctrine, or the Eisenkot Doctrine, which says that if Israel is attacked, it needs to retaliate in an proportional strength, and to destroy a lot of infrastructure, specifically like both military and civilian infrastructure, to make the rebuilding of normal life after that in Lebanon, in that case, harder. Thus bringing the civilian population who support Hezbollah in that case to be much more fearful from future engagements with Israel, bringing the toll to the population. And this is an explicit policy for many years for the IDF. So this is the first thing. Destruction itself is a tool for a future, I don't know how to say it, but like blackmail. Because until all of the population, everyone that his house was destroyed, will be able to rebuild his house, you have some control over the life of the people there, and you can deter the enemy from attacking you. So this is the first one. The second one is that in a semi-official capacity, not in an official capacity, the IDF, around the same questions of what we call the fight, the war on terror in Israel, that the fighting organizations that are, as we love to say in Israel, embedded in civilian population, requires us to start changing the priorities of whose life is more important to defend in a conflict. Meaning, if the regular hierarchy by the international law is civilians are always to be protected, then you need to protect your own soldiers, and then you need to, I don't know, protect the lives of your enemy combatants. We flipped it. Now in Israel, in the IDF and how it conducts itself, for many reasons, we fight the war as if our soldiers' lives are higher in the hierarchy than those of the civilian population, in the Palestinian civilian population. And this is very explicit, meaning everywhere that an IDF unit will go in Gaza, for example, it will use an unproportional firepower to provide the most security to the soldiers and again, in the process, many civilians will be killed if they're not evacuated the area. And this is a fact of how the IDF fights for many years. When we started the war, we had, in Breaking the Silence, a few months when we didn't have any testifiers coming to us. I would say, again, I'm a researcher and testimony gatherer. And for months, we didn't really had anyone come talk to us because a lot of them were in Gaza fighting. But a few months after the war started to drag on, people started to come to us. And one of the first things that we heard a lot of crazy, fucked up shit about how the war was conducted. But while we're waiting and trying to understand what is going on, what is the plan for the army, we started to hear both from leaks to the media by all kinds of Israeli public figures and from our testifiers that there will be this buffer zone established around the whole Gaza Strip. For the distance of the security strip was not clear at the start. It's still not as clear as we would want it to be, but that was the first indication of any future plans by the government and the army of what would like the post-war border with Gaza look like. Like, we don't have until this very recent development that Margot started with, the new plan by the cabinet, we didn't have any kind of idea or indication what is the plan for the Gaza Strip by the Israeli government and military. And this was the first indication that was set in military orders, and that was to destroy every single structure that was in the first kilometer of the Gaza Strip. It was done very methodically with engineering units and heavy engineering equipment and explosives. All the population was expelled, of course, and the area was declared a no-go zone. Generally, till now, the whole first kilometer of Gaza, which is 16% of the entire area of the Gaza Strip, is a no-go zone for Palestinians. And it is supposed to stay like that if we're to believe the announcement of Israeli public figures, which is crazy because, as Louis said, it's 35% of the agricultural area. It was the home of more than 200,000 people who are now refugees somewhere in the Gaza Strip. And for now, if we are serious about the IDF staying in this strip, it's something that would not allow any kind of hostage deal, because Hamas, for now, is insisting that for a hostage deal, we need to withdraw from the whole of Gaza Strip. So I don't know, maybe the new plan will change Hamas' mind, but I don't think so. And I don't think we should, if we want to see the hostages back home alive, those of them who can still be home alive, we shouldn't build too many hopes on that idea. So the whole concept of declaring this area a no-go zone, expelling everyone and destroying everything, is something that will not allow us to even end this hostility. I'm not talking even about the future peace agreement. It would be very hard to convince now the Israeli public after the Israeli public figures and generals said that the perimeter is necessary for the security and to prevent another October 7th, it would be very hard to convince people that this is an unjust policy that need to be reversed. I have a lot more to say on that, and I can also read testimonies if you'd like later, but I think we'll bring it back to Margot for now.
Thank you both for that very comprehensive sort of overview of what we're looking at, and not only the context that motivated this report, but also sort of how it's landing and how these military decisions are sort of resonating alongside a larger Israeli public discourse. I have sort of some smaller or shorter range informational questions I wanted to ask the two of you just to lift up some parts of this report that seem so really vital in this moment to understanding exactly what's going on. And I really want to encourage folks, as questions come up for you, put them in the Q&A. You can also upvote. There's a little thumbs up in the bottom left corner, so right here, of every question in the Q&A. So if someone asks a question that you also have, I really encourage people to upvote it so we know sort of which questions are the most popular. And I am also seeing a question in the chat about a recording. Yes, the session is being recorded, and like all of our webinars will go on our YouTube and be available at the partners website within a couple of days. So Louise and Guy, as you were saying, right, a buffer zone did exist in Gaza prior to October 7th, about 300 meters past the security fence. And some people in this call might have seen how that zone practically functions, actually, right? In the video, some of us have seen of hostage families crossing through the Gaza border fence last year, right? And crossing the fence and being met by IDF soldiers when they had moved beyond Israel's borders. And as you mentioned, both of you, there's also this buffer zone that existed in southern Lebanon from 1985 to 2000. But I appreciate the way in which both you here on this call and in the report lift up the ways in which this new zone is really something different. But I'm wondering if you could just describe sort of on one foot for us, in comparison to what was happening previously, this 300-meter buffer zone, how large and comprehensive is the buffer zone in Gaza right now? And also, you mentioned the polygons. How does a Palestinian civilian living in Gaza know when they've approached the buffer zone? How do people, is this something that exists on maps, or how do people experience this on the ground?
So if I can share a screen, maybe I can show the audience the perimeter. Would that be okay?
We're not allowed to share screens, but if you have a link online, I can put the link in the chat.
No, I don't.
I can't
Never
reconfigure
mind.
the webinar. Okay. It is available in the PDF that we've sent
Yes,
out to folks, and it's indicated in red if people want a map of what Guy is referring to.
So basically, before, both me and Luis served on the Gaza border as infantrymen. Luis in 2017 or 18, I think. I was there in 2019. And when I was back there, there was a lot of harsh repression in this area that Luis talked about, which was meant to be sterile. But it was repressive. We were expelling a lot of farmers that were, I don't know, coming too close to us and stuff like that. But generally, there was life in this area. We're talking about the first 1,000 meters, or I don't know how to say it in imperial measurements, but like, I don't know, half a mile, more than half a mile of like agricultural land that now with the new perimeter is completely both destroyed, agricultural land, trees, orchards, houses, everything, and as well, like, is not allowed, Palestinians are not allowed to move around. You asked very smartly how Palestinians who live in Gaza know where the perimeter starts. And the most simple question is that they don't. There is not any kind of how can you say it, like signs on the ground or anything that is visible that could indicate you're coming into an area that is dangerous for you, that you could be shot for being it. which is super cool. Like it's unbelievably cool. We have some testimonies of kids who are coming to pick up khubeza, which is like an edible plant that a lot of people eat around here, a traditional Palestinian food. And we're talking in amidst of a man-made famine, where millions of people are extremely hungry to starving. And just being there looking for edible plants could be a good enough reason for people to shoot at you. This wasn't the case in the past. It was not this this dichotomy of like nobody is getting in here. Like, and I think it's also something to learn about the occupation from this, because if you talked about what Louis said about the buffer zone in South Lebanon. In the buffer zone in South Lebanon, where Israel was illegally occupying part of Lebanon for almost 20 years or 18 years, we still allowed people to live. It was an occupation, of course, with everything bad that comes with it, but we didn't expel the whole population of southern Lebanon because we decided that we need the buffer zone. Now we have this total sterile land, as if we think that the mere presence or existence of Palestinian near the border communities in Israel is a threat that we cannot live with. And this is crazy and immoral, and we cannot allow it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Louise, please.
I must just enter in the issue of the security justification of this new perimeter, and with all of that Guy mentioned right now. It's in itself an admission that you are not solving the problem, right? Why you need a bigger buffer zone? It's because you know that the problem will not be solved. So you must build this false sensation of security, right? And keeping the permanent war state forever until, I don't know, what are the fantasies of this Canist government, until like everyone leaves Gaza willing right now. They are talking about the transfer. I don't know how to exactly translate, but to a voluntary removal, self-removal of the Gaza Strip. Like things don't work like that. And the idea of having this perimeter with all the prices, the moral prices, and the life that has been destroyed, it's a false sensation. And unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we like for 1.5 years we didn't know the strategy, we didn't know the government is planning for the day after, we don't know what are the real alternatives. But in the background, there were things that were being cooked, and I cannot say I'm surprised, unfortunately, right? And I remember for me it was really touching when I knew that Daniela Weiss, the settler leader from, if I'm not, a Nahala movement, if I'm right, she went to Brazil because I think she cannot enter the States, right? And she went to Brazil then to get resources for this new resettlement of the Gaza Strip, and that's a huge fear that I had since the beginning of this war. But unfortunately, I can say that I cannot say definitely that's what's going to happen. But things are going on, and we really need to look at them in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an emergency situation.
Yeah.
I'll reflect, one of the things that emerged most strongly in the report for me as a reader was this real flattening you're describing, both a literal flattening of homes, of agriculture, of farming fields, of neighborhoods, but also the metaphorical flattening, right, of distinctions between civilian and terror targets, both in terms of infrastructure, but also like human life. Louise, I want to pick up on a thread I think that you've already opened, right? That many of us on this call are likely familiar with what we might sort of term political as opposed to military negotiations around Gaza, as discussed publicly by Israel's Security Cabinet prior to their announcement this week about plans for occupying the Strip. But this sort of, you know, will there or won't there be a day after plan? And, reports even coming out today of could the United States somehow legally oversee a day after in Gaza, right? There's been sort of a lot of noise about a lack thereof of real political steps forward. And at the same time, right, as described by this report, the missions being taken by IDF soldiers on the ground, right, really this avoidance it was so clear to me in the report. The avoidance of the sort of Israel's political class of establishing a real day after plan sort of places the responsibility for the reality on the ground in the enclave onto the IDF instead. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about this gap, that, right, like there's sort of the political conversation, but then the military reality that's happening on the ground that you're now collecting reports about.
So for me, it's not really a new phenomenon, like in Israel, ever since we can go even further than that, but ever since Israel acquired by occupation the control in the West Bank and Gaza, um, the question of the occupation, of Palestinian independence, of Palestinian self-determination was always pushed from the political arena to the military decision-making process. Mostly because for two reasons. The army is very much a strong institution in Israeli society, and it has a lot of trust that almost no other institution in Israel has. And the very much cowardly actions of the Israeli politicians over the years. So, like with any other aspect of the occupation, you have the political leadership. Basically, they like to say stuff, but they don't like to commit to any kind of long-term political project. We can say that the settlers are like very strong within the government, but it's not like we can say that Netanyahu is, very much committed to their political project or another political project. No politician in Israel is really willing to talk about the future or have plans for this kind of stuff. They mostly want to stay quiet and say that they will fight the terrorists. Meaning handing all of the problems and all of the solutions to the IDF, which is an army like any other army in the world. It works with army decision makings matrices, meaning the whole professional hierarchy is made out of people who their art, job, and science is the application of force and violence. I'm not saying that this is not a necessary institution. I'm just saying that it has only the power of the soul, by definition. And it is really not that surprising that after a crisis like October 7th, the Israeli society and the political class in Israel just threw all of their chips behind just do the military stuff, let the army works with his plan to how to engage Hamas, and we will make the decisions later. We see the result now.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it was folks are looking at this text at all very early, right? In this report, you featured discussions with officers and sergeants who are comparing the buffer zone in that they've created to Hiroshima repeatedly in terms of the devastation and the asymmetricality of what they're experiencing. I want to lift up, there's sort of a collection of questions in the chat about the IDF's stated or on the ground, sort of as they arise, right? I think we could describe it sort of top down or bottom up goals, both in the buffer zone and beyond within Gaza. I'm seeing questions about sort of if you can explain sort of why either officially or after the fact we're seeing these conversations around schools, hospitals, mosques, refugee centers being targets. Is this a result of some of this flattening between what is a civilian target and a terror target? Is it sort of the discourse around Hamas's use of civilian infrastructure to run a guerrilla campaign, for lack of a better word? But how can we sort of understand the violence that we're seeing and whether or not it connects or disconnects to any sort of political discourse that's also contextualizing all of this?
Was that a question?
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm sort of describing the gap and asking you what do we, as especially there's a lot of Israelis on this call, but also Americans, sort of how might we hold those pieces together? I think is ultimately the question, because they don't fit into a, sort of from what you're describing, like, on purpose, don't fit into a cohesive packaged narrative. But there's what we're hearing, there's what we're seeing, and there's what's happening on the ground. And it's I will say very difficult to somebody on an ocean and a half away to understand how to make these sort of fit together in a way that is understandable.
For sure. Luis, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, I would like to start. Like having the security narrative being so strong and so tight here in Israel, with one of the most traumatized people in all over history, it's something that works really good. But we must also pay attention, and also not only in the establishment narrative, right? But in how we are proposing also through the booklet of the perimeter itself to look at what has been being done. And the first fact that I would like to point out is that I'm not specialist in Palestinian and Gazan society, but it's one of the most populated areas all over the world, right? In the disengagement plan, we one-sidedly left all the land without any kind of plan or any kind of organized conversation with any Palestinian agent in the equation, right? Which then, not surprisingly, make open. They spread the idea that make it possible to Hamas to take the power, expel the opposition, and then Israel could look at it, and, as I mentioned before, as a issue or as a and how to translate that?
Hostile entity.
Hostile, yeah, exactly. That's the word. Hostile entity, right? And since then, that has been the game that we have been playing to the Gaza Strip. And I not when I mentioned I'm not specialist in Palestinian society in Gaza, but I think it's really hard to tell from where the threats are really coming and differentiating that from civilian population inside of this so complex context of a place that is being under siege for so many years, and we definitely control everything from sea, air, and land, everything that goes in and goes out. So, of course, independently of your narrative or independently of your strategy and tactics, you need to deal with this question of what you're doing, because civilians are living there. And this idea that we can keep controlling millions of people and having a bigger perimeter, that will bring a security, it's a fantasy, it's a illusion. and it's the denial of the state of Israel, and definitely of this extremely right-wing government, to deny the Palestinians their right to recognize to exist here with us, and this opened the scenario that the narratives they contradict themselves, because that's not what we are doing. It's not only security.
I want to add to that just for everybody to be clear on that, the perimeter, of course, is a very small part of the Gaza war. For us, it was a good. I would say first why we wrote about it, but then I would expand to all the other subjects. But for us, it was a very clear an area that we had a clear indication of orders of systematic destruction, not based on any kind of particular distinction between terrorist or civilian infrastructure. This was the reason that we put our lights to this project, because in this area it was a methodical destruction of everything. But it does not mean that in other areas in the Gaza Strip where the IDF fought, the destruction is any less harmful. Everywhere that the IDF has maneuvered into in the Gaza Strip is destroyed to some capacity, and is and it is true both for homes, mosques, hospitals, and everything else. We cannot say, though, like we can say about the perimeter, from our own testimonies, we do not have the clear information to provide the public with, we cannot say clearly, we see here a campaign of this same systematic annihilation. I don't say that it does not exist. I'm saying that we just don't have testimonies to support a claim like that. But the new plans that the cabinet has now declared is basically to expand the logic of the perimeter to the whole Gaza Strip. And if you saw a little bit about what was leaked to the public and was even publicly stated by the Secretary of Defense, Katz, we are going to reoccupy the whole of the Gaza Strip from the north to the south, expelling the whole population into, and I'm sorry to use those words, but concentrate the whole population in pre-made camps controlled by the IDF in the south of the Strip, which is an horrifying thing to say. And we think that it is like an example of how far can we take this clear or sterile area concept. Because what we are saying after we make all the population know that they need to evacuate, after a few days and a few, after we decide that it is an appropriate time, we say, okay, this area was supposed to be evacuated. Everyone that is still here is considered a terrorist. And everywhere
like
that
the
an
necessary
IDF...
corridor. Exactly.
So when you think about it, it's absolutely horrifying, and it is like an emergency. So I hope that I could come back in another month and say, no, it didn't happen. By the end, we were saved by President Trump or something like that, and somebody decided to say no to Bibi. But for now, it looks that this logic is going to expand to the whole Gaza envelope.
Yeah, it's horrifying, frankly, right? I think we've all heard these calls from the Security Cabinet, right? An active occupation of Gaza. This is a call for ethnic cleansing, and now the leaked material that you're describing. It's not the official policy, but these leaked materials to concentrate people in a camp. Right? Like whether we're having this conversation as progressive Americans, as Jews, both, there's a particular horror to this language being used, on top of just watching it unfold in front of our eyes. I want to pick up on this last thing that you said, Guy, about that someone needs to say no. Right here at PPI, we're aware increasingly of calls from a number of our partners in Israel to sort of to refuse publicly, to broadly to refuse the war on a societal level, but we're also seeing increased reports of, and it's was raised in the Q&A as well, of reservists refusing to serve. And I'm curious if you're able to share with us to what extent or what the implications of some of this new policy to treat all of Gaza like a perimeter zone or like a death zone, as you refer to it in the report, is having on people's willingness to show up and be part of this project. Is that something that you're hearing from people on the ground, is breaking the silence, or more broadly just in Israel right now? I'm really curious.
I'll start. Maybe Luis, you can add if you like, but we're seeing this is a broader trend of people who are saying either signing petitions or just not coming to serve in the new reserve corps. It's very hard to understand numbers for reals, and we don't really know how wide is this. There is also a big distinction that is being made between political disobeying the call and people who are just fed up for their own reasons, either because they've been called back and forth from a war for 2 years now, which is something that nobody planned for and nobody really like to do. So a lot of people are just not showing up from what I understand. And there is a sense that this new operation is less a consensus within this Israeli society, that is more politically motivated or more how do you say it? I don't remember, but never mind. It does not have the unifying effect that the start of the first maneuvers in the Gaza Strip in 2023 had. I don't think that we're talking now about a political movement that can stop the war in Israel. And it's very hard to say, but for now, I cannot see it. Maybe we'll have some good news in the next few weeks. Maybe the operation would be postponed, because for now it is postponed for at least another week. But it seems that even if half of the reservists would not show up, there would still be enough to expel the whole population to the south of Gaza. What's after that? We don't know, for real. But yeah.
I'm curious, we have folks on this call from Israel, from Europe, but also a majority of Americans. I'm asking in mind that, Israel, one of the reasons the Security Cabinet, according to some reports, is delaying the beginning of this operation is a wait for Trump, for the American president to arrive and have a conversation, potentially with members of the cabinet. I'm curious what we who are outside of Israel right now, what are the levers what we have to help and assist. What can we do sort of in this context? I think a lot of people are feeling so overwhelmed and so helpless in the face of sort of this gloves off, we're going to say the quiet part out loud approach from the security cabinet right now. But are there sort of levers of support that we can provide as well?
Sure. Yeah, I imagine also that in the US, definitely the things are being filled, and a lot of things are going on there, and also a lot of local issues. And Trump is making a lot of other situation problematics, and of course the Jewish communities must also deal with everything. And I imagine that it's not being easy with also Israel in the war, the crisis, and all the scenario, and also everything that's going on under Trump. And those are very strong forces, right? It's really hard to get organized and to fight against it. But I think definitely it's very important to get, maybe a bit cliche, but it's very important to get a lot of knowledge and get involved and get involved with the Israeli civil society, with Palestinian partners. Bring your community to talk about it, bring the subject, talk with your representatives. If you are involved in politics, definitely you may have a voice or a way to influence. Talk with your rabbi, talk with your family and friends and communities. And those are small steps that I think that may help us to get more organized, more inside of the context, and of course influencing it the most we can. Yeah.
I want to add to that, because I think that most people, like, of course, always supporting civil society is always important, and learning about the situation is always important. I want to add that for regular people in the US specifically, I think the most important thing that you can do, and I want to reference question number 10 by Abigail Cobb, is to fight the criminalization of pro-Palestinian groups in America, and to stop don't let this issue be pushed into something for Palestinians, for students, for young people. This is an issue that should be on every American's mind, and not just Americans, of course, but I really think that this is the most scary thing for me to see from here about the new administration, and generally the vibe is to see how successful the people and organizations in the US that try to criminalize and push this discussion out of the table, how successful they've been in the last few months. And again, I'm not an American citizen, I'm not an expert on American politics, but for me, that would be, if I were an American citizen, the most infuriating, and it's a civil rights issue for people in America to be able to talk about this stuff without intimidation. So this is just my
I appreciate it.
And remember that we are here. We are here for that. We are here also. Love to be invited to talk more and to bring the voice of the soldier and explain why the policy of the occupation is unsustainable, does not bring security, is immoral, doesn't work, and we must wake up from this this nightmare, this life of fighting and dying and doing the immoral.
Amen, amen. And we are so, so grateful to both of you, Louise and Guy, for joining us and for being in and sitting in this very difficult conversation as well with all of our attendees. Right, we cannot kind of engage in this narrative change if we're not having these conversations, as horrifically painful as they are. So I really just want to end on a note of gratitude for the two of you and for everyone who was with us today, was asking questions, was engaging, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ron to close us out.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Guy and Louise. Thanks everyone for for joining us today. I really appreciate, I think it was you, Guy, who talked about the perimeter as a sort of microcosm, as a distilled essence of what's going on in Gaza, that it's not identical all over Gaza, but that the report regarding a specific area of Gaza is very applicable to the situation in general. I think that was a really important point. Personally, as I was listening, but also reading the report in advance, one of the major ethical questions to me that's raised is, what's the limit of what can be justified by the concept of security, as precious as security and safety are. You know, in the U.S. constitutional law, we know that even the most fundamental rights aren't considered unlimited. They're all subject to qualification. They're balanced against the validity of other rights. To me, this webinar helps bring home, and the report helps bring home, that Israeli security is not, it's not sui generis. It's not unique. It can only be valid to the extent that it's not, that it's being balanced against other fundamental rights as well. So I appreciate you all bringing that to our attention. Two quick programming notes for people who missed the opening. Tomorrow and Friday is the People's Peace Summit in Jerusalem, and partners will be sending out, if you're not in Israel or Palestine, partners will be sending out a link for the live stream via email. So it's a good opportunity to get on partners' email list. And next Wednesday, May 14th, we'll be hosting representatives of the Regional Council for Unrecognized Villages of the Negev, and registration link will be going out later this week. Last reminder, while today's program has been free, generous contributions are what enable the organization to deliver these events at no cost. So if you can, please visit progressiveisrael.org, check out upcoming programming, and if you can, make a donation. Thank you for sitting through what is a very difficult topic and difficult subject matter to hear about. Hope you can join us for a different topic next Wednesday, May 14th, when we host the Regional Council for Unrecognized Villages of the Negev. Thank you and be well.
Thank you all. Take care, everyone. Be well.